morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Deborah, for that introduction. It's rather an intimidating build-up, I'm afraid, which I don't think I'll be able to live up to, but I'll do my best. I must begin by apologising for our late arrival, but the chair is right that the tube strike didn't make getting to the train station on time easy, and I'm afraid we didn't. But at least we're here, and I hope without too much disruption to your programme. Now, I've got quite a lot to say, so I'll crack on. The Law Commission was set up in October 2012 by the Legal Action Group, with funding from a number of charitable trusts and foundations, led by the Baring Foundation, and with support from one or two firms of solicitors, to develop a strategy for advice and legal support on social welfare law in England and Wales, following major cuts in legal aid and local authority funding. The almost complete removal from the scope of legal aid of welfare benefits advice not only has serious consequences for individuals who need advice and support, but inevitably has a significant impact on the advice sector as well. Services are closing or retrenching on a significant scale. Citizens Advice's income is estimated to have fallen by over 18.5% between 2010-11 and 2013-14. The loss of welfare benefits from the scope of the legal aid system has meant that most of the just under 300 not-for-profit providers, including 128 CABs, left the legal aid system in April 2013. All this is happening at a time when the demand for advice and legal support has never been higher and can only grow further as the government's welfare reforms are rolled out. Our first report was published in January 2014. It contained 100 recommendations. The 6 most important were, first, that public legal education should be given higher priority, both in the school alongside financial literacy and in education for life, so that people know their rights and where to go for help. Secondly, though there are certainly factors making for increased demand in the welfare reforms and other austerity measures, we're convinced there are also ways of reducing the need for advice and legal support in the first place. For example, the DWP could be incentivised to get more decisions right first time by being required to pay costs on upheld appeals. Thirdly, we suggest ways in which courts and tribunals could work more efficiently. Fourthly, we say, what we said in 2014, the next UK and Welsh governments should develop national strategies for advice and legal support, preferably with all party support, and there should be a minister with responsibility for advice and legal support within the Ministry of Justice, with a cross-departmental brief for leading the development of the strategy. Fifthly, local authorities or groups of local authorities should co-produce or commission local advice and legal support plans with the local not-for-profit sector and commercial advice agencies. And sixthly, we estimate that a further 100 million a year is required to ensure a basic level of provision of information, advice and legal support on social welfare law. We're calling on the UK government to provide half of this by establishing a 10-year, 10 years to enable long-term planning, a 10-year National Advice and Legal Support Fund for England and Wales of 50 million a year to be administered by the Big Lottery Fund. We aim to spread the load so that no part of government is asked to bear too great a burden. We therefore propose that the fund should be financed by the Ministry of Justice, the Cabinet Office and DWP as the main creator of the need for advice and legal support. 90% of the fund should be used to fund local provision in line with local plans, with 10% being retained for national initiatives. The Big Lottery Fund should allocate the 90% share of the national fund to local authority areas based on indicators of need using joint strategic needs assessments and health and well-being strategies. We also identified other national and local statutory, voluntary and commercial sources of funding which we believe could contribute an additional £50 million a year to match the national fund. These include NHS clinical commissioning groups, housing associations, and additional money advice service funding, for example, by introducing a levy on payday loan companies. Trusts and foundations, the big lottery fund itself, and lawyer fund generation schemes could also contribute. In addition to the current range of specialist lines, there should be a one-stop national helpline providing a comprehensive advice service for the general public and able to act as a safety net for those who have nowhere else to go. Greater use needs to be made of new technology for the section of the population which is increasingly digitally literate. This could free up resources to ensure that more face-to-face, in-depth and intensive support can be targeted at those most in need. We were under pressure to recommend simple reinstatement of the cuts. However, in a situation where we have to accept that there will be less money for legal help and representation, we were anxious to develop a fresh approach which, through measures to reduce the need for advice and legal support in the first place, developing more cost-effective approaches to service provision, and drawing on a wider range of funding sources than hitherto, ensured that people could still meet a lot of their needs through a greater emphasis on information and advice, whilst at the same time ensuring that there is at least some money available for legal help and representation. Rather than recommending simple reinstatement, we preferred to think in terms of a continuum of provision, including public legal education, informal and formal information and general advice, often provided by local authorities, specialist advice, legal help and legal representation. We took the view that it was important to tackle the whole of this continuum in an integrated fashion, and that legal aid should be seen as just one part of it and not in isolation as a standalone funding mechanism. With cuts of the order of £100 million in legal aid, it seemed clear to us that the advice end of the spectrum was going to need to take more of the strain. The more we can do at the beginning of the process, we reckoned, the less we may need to do at the end. Although I said we weren't arguing for a simple restoration of the cuts, that doesn't mean to say that we wouldn't like to see any of them being reversed. We'd like to see funding reinstated for housing cases, for instance, so that people can get help before they reach crisis point and face imminent eviction. The scheme for funding exceptional cases under Section 10 of the LESPO Act also needs to be reviewed because, as things stand, it's just not working. It was intended to act as a safety net for funding cases that would now be out of scope of legal aid, but where either human rights or European Union law require the provision of legal aid. During the passage of the LESPO Act, it was estimated that there would be some 5,000 to 7,000 of these cases a year, but according to a recent parliamentary answer, the total number of applications so far is only just over 1,000, of which only 30-odd have been granted. In summary, our strategy was to suggest ways of reducing preventable demand, simplifying the system and enabling it to work better, putting more weight on the advice end of the spectrum and suggesting ways in which it can work more efficiently. We believe that by investing in a wider range of information and advice, with some legal help and representation, many of the undesirable consequences of the LESPO Act can be avoided, and we will actually saving money. At all events, we hope that our report will make a useful contribution to the stabilisation and rehabilitation of our system of advice and legal support on social welfare law. Now, many reports lie on the shelf. We were determined this shouldn't happen to our report, so the Commission went into a second phase in order to work for implementation of its recommendations. We're very grateful to our funders who have enabled us to do this, and very lucky that the work has been spearheaded by James Sandbach, our research and campaigns manager, who's come here with me today. So if there are any difficult questions that come up, I'll call on him to answer them. Our second report, Getting It Right in Social Welfare Law, was published in March this year. Since the publication of our first report, we observed that the advice deficit had widened significantly. In the first year since the implementation of LESPO, 9 law centres have closed, comprising a sixth of the law centres network. That network estimates that local government support for law centres has reduced by almost a quarter since 2010-11. We noted alarming evidence of critical needs which were not being met. For instance, food bank use had increased by a factor of over 2.5, and there was an 82% increase in the number of people seeking help with payday loan debts. We continue to find major problems with the operation of the social security system. In view of this, we continue to advocate that the DWP should contribute to the funding of advice agencies in recognition of the fact that its policies may be a driving demand for advice services. We were also aware that further and deeper cuts were on the way. As just one, but a major example, Manchester City Council has announced budget cuts of between 50 and 75% to its advice services and the voluntary community sector. These include ceasing all funding for the citywide universal advice service currently delivered by Manchester CBE and Cheetham Hill Advice Centre, which helps over 30,000 people each year. It would also mean the closure of 3 CABs, the citywide telephone advice service, which currently deals with over 3,500 calls a month, and the face-to-face outreach service, which provides advice to vulnerable groups and individuals at 32 venues in their local community, such as GP surgeries, libraries, and children's centres. We also made some new recommendations. The MOJ should bring forward its post-implementation review of LASPO. The DWP should be required to make a strategic contribution to the National Advice and Legal Support Fund. Health and social care commissioners should always ensure that their plans include social welfare advice and legal support provision. The Advice Services Transition Fund should be continued for another year. Each government department with major responsibility for the delivery of public services involving social welfare matters should consider appointing an advice champion with shared responsibility for the advice and legal support strategy. And finally, the next comprehensive spending review should consider how far government departments' funding for advice can be consolidated into the National Advice and Legal Support Fund. Why should the government fund these recommendations? Well, even in times of austerity, £50 million a year split between 3 government departments isn't exactly mega. Last year, we commissioned and published a review of the evidence emerging from cost-benefit analyses of the provision of social welfare advice. It concluded that there was a great deal of evidence to suggest that early legal advice saves the state money, so that pound for pound, there's a return on investment. We've seen figures comparing the cost of early and late interventions when dealing with housing problems in Coventry. They showed that late intervention involved social costs of £8,837, with direct costs to the state of £5,287 in greater legal and repossession costs, and greater legal and repossession costs and so on. That's a total of £14,124, whereas early intervention involved social costs of only £1,516 and state costs of £200, totaling £1,716. So there's a considerable difference. All these considerations add up to a substantial argument that it would be a good investment for the government to find the money for our recommendations. We've just recently produced a 3rd report, as the chairman said, but I haven't left myself very much time to talk about it, I'm afraid. With the Advice Services Alliance, we've been reviewing the evidence which suggests that timely legal and other specialist advice can lead to better health outcomes. Poverty and social welfare problems are routinely associated with ill health, especially mental ill health. Our report shows how the right welfare advice in the right place produces real benefits for patients' health, especially where advice services work directly with the NHS and care providers, and presents clear evidence that early and effective advice reduces demand on the NHS. The report marshals the evidence of both the adverse health impact of social welfare problems and the beneficial health effects of receiving good advice. These include better general health, better relationships, lower stress and anxiety, better sleeping patterns, more effective use of medication, ceasing smoking, greater housing stability, and improved diet and physical activity. So far as demand on the NHS is concerned, welfare advice in primary health settings can reduce the estimated 15% of their time that GPs spend on benefits issues and lead to fewer repeat appointments and fewer prescriptions. Our research from polling GPs suggests that there is a strong case for greater integration of advice and health. Some commissioners of local health and care services have pioneered the provision of advice services as part of community and primary care. However, such provision is patchy, and there's a need for a more systematic link between health and advice commissioning. Now, I've left no time for a rousing peroration, so I'll just repeat our hope that our work will make a useful contribution to the stabilisation and rehabilitation of advice services in this country, and our conviction that the evidence we've presented adds up to a substantial case for the government to find the money to implement our recommendations. Thank you very much.
Very much, Lord Lowe. That was absolutely brilliant, actually. So, you know, this whole point about the need for national strategies, absolutely, the need for people coming together. One of the things we're doing here at this conference today is bringing together to do things. The importance of getting it right at the early stages, the need for consolidation of funds, the fact that